With Ayaka just around the corner, I thought it would be a good idea to make a video just kind of outlining the main points to consider. Being one of the people who's going to pull for Ayaka, I've been thinking really hard about what kind of artifacts we'd want to run on her, and then I've also been looking at what other people are saying. And the general consensus seems to be that a Blizzard Strayer is the way to go, being a 4-piece Blizzard Strayer, with the runner-up being 2-piece Blizzard and 2-piece Gladiator. After taking it into consideration, I think running a 4-piece Blizzard Strayer is going to give you better results, unless you're running certain weapons that give you lots of crit rate, which we're going to talk about. The other set I think could be decent is Retracing Bowline, because it will buff her charged attack, and I think because she's going to be a little bit like a Ching, that's going to be a very strong point of her kit. With the other strong point that you don't want to skimp out on is her ultimate or her burst. Running 4-piece Blizzard Strayer or 2-piece Blizzard and 2-piece Glad will buff both her charged attack and her ult, which is why I think they're a better option than a Retracing Bowline, which would only buff her charged attack, so you'd be losing on some sort of either attack percent or cryo damage bonus buff on her ultimate. But it can make her hit really hard, and if you'd pair it with the 5-star weapon, the Summit Shaper, then I think you can get really good results from Retracing Bowline also, where her charged attacks are hitting for insane numbers. So the reason that Blizzard Strayer is so good is that if you utilize its effect to its maximum potential and use Cryo Resonance, then you can get a 20% crit rate buff for when the enemy has the cryo application on them, a 20% crit rate buff when they're frozen, and then a 15 from the resonance. This adds up to a 55% crit rate buff. Added onto your base 5%, you get to basically 60%, and then you only need about 30% more from your substats on your artifacts in order to reach something like 90%. This allows you to also run even lower numbers like 10 or 15% crit rate from your substats on your artifacts if you're utilizing the set effect to its maximum potential. Now, because the 4-piece effect depends on your opponents or enemies actually being completely frozen, you're going to need to run a permafreeze team, which I'm going to talk about a bit in my next video. So if you're running Blizzard Strayer, for the base crit rate, you're going to probably want 15 or 20% at a minimum, and I would say ideally you want 30 or 35% crit rate. If you're at 30 or 35 with the 55% buff, you'll get to about 85 or 90% crit rate, which is very good because you're critting basically all of the time. The stats that you should be looking for are about 30% crit rate, which will get boosted up to 85 with the 4-piece Blizzard Strayer set effect, and then about 250% crit damage. The reason you can go for so much crit damage is because you're not investing into your crit rate, and you're getting that from the artifacts, from the 4-piece artifact effect, and so you should be trying to get all of your other rolls basically to go directly into crit damage and be running a crit damage headpiece and a crit damage weapon. Your attack should be about 1,800 or more. I'd say a minimum is about 1,700. You could get away with 1,600, but you're going to notice that there your numbers are a little bit lower than they should be. And you're going to be losing damage from kind of diminishing returns by having too much invested into crit rather than getting enough into attack. A very good value to have is about 2,000 or more attack. But if you're running a 4-star weapon, then I'd say the 1,800 plus is a very good place to be. You can also consider, once you reach 200% crit damage, just investing into attack, because at that point, the optimization might actually turn out to favor attack rather than more crit damage, so that you're not suffering from diminishing returns. So here I'm going to show an example of the set that I'm running. And so here we can see basically the important stuff. I've got a Chongyun's attack right now. He's got the prototype Archaic, so he's got a little bit extra attack percentage, but it's not leveled up fully. I guess this attack is a little bit misleading, but it looks like it should be decent because she'll have pretty high base attack and Chongyun is not leveled up a lot. The crit rate here is 28.3%, so that's pretty good. We're going to get close to 85% with the 55% crit rate buff from the 4-piece Blizzard Strayer. And then my crit damage is 146.4%. Now the sword I'm going to run is going to be the 4-star Blackcliff sword, because that's basically the best free-to-play sword that you can get, and it's really good because it's got the crit damage. It's, I think, 36.8% crit damage, and then she's also going to get about 38.4% from her Ascension, and so this is going to come out to about 220% crit damage. That's going to be pretty good with the very high crit rate once I utilize her in a perma-freeze team. That's sort of what you want to aim for. Mine could be a little bit better, as some of those artifacts were not ideally rolled, but for my purposes and the fact that I need to go farm Crimson Witch and other stuff, being free to play, I don't have that many resources. This is probably going to be good enough, and I think once I get her talents up and level her up as high as I can, probably to around 80, she's going to be doing really good with this stat distribution. Or the other considerations that we should keep in mind with Ayaka is that without a Blizzard Strayer, if you're going to run some other set, either 2-piece Glad and 2-piece Blizzard Strayer or the Retracing Bowlight, I don't recommend running a full Glad set, because I just recently realized that the 4-piece effect set doesn't buff your charged attacks, it only buffs your normal attacks, and so I don't even see how that could be good on someone like Kaching, because you really do want the charged attack buff, because that's the bulk of your damage. And so that's why I'd rather recommend a Retracing Bowlight, which will buff both the normal and the charged, so at least your charge will hit pretty hard, and if you have enough crit damage, your burst should be okay. If you could get, but 2-piece Blizzard and 2-piece Glad is nicer because you're buffing both your ultimate and your charged attacks and normal attacks and every form of damage that you're doing. So if you're going to use something other than Blizzard Strayer, you want a minimum of 65% crit damage. If you use Cryo Resonance, you can get this up to 80%, which is good enough. If you're not using it, then 65 is kind of the like lower limit. That's like where if you're under that, you're just gonna start feeling really inconsistent when you're critting, and you might just have too much crit damage. Yeah, sorry, this should be, you want a minimum of 65% crit rate, not damage. So here I want to talk a little bit about her weapons. For her weapons, basically any of the 5 stars except like the Skyward Sword and Quivilla Favonia, because you should not be running basically Ayaka with a physical build, because of its physical damage like bonus, it's losing a lot of potential there. So all of the other 5 stars are basically her best ones that you want to use, so that's including Jade Cutter, Summit Shaper, and the new one, which is the Mist Splitter. Mist Splitter is definitely her best in slot. I don't really need to do math, I'd say. It's just a crit damage sword with a really good passive effect. You really want to use the Mist Splitter if you can get it. If you're free to play, you're probably not going to get it. I mean, you might, but like, maybe if you've been saving, you do have those like 40,000 Primo Gems right now, you go get your Ayaka, and then you just dump everything else into the weapon banner. You might get it, but for a typical free-to-play who goes for lots of characters, this is the, you can do like 10 pulls and you might get lucky, but you're probably not going to get this. If you have these, use these, they're going to be really good. If you get Mist Splitter, then just run Blizzard Strayer, but you should aim for slightly different stats, which I'm going to, which are basically, you want like the 30% crit rate or a little bit higher. You can aim for 100% crit rate with the buff. That's definitely okay. I think 85 is usually enough, and it kind of comes down to like what your preference is, whether you'd like to see higher damage numbers, and in that case you can lean a little bit more into the crit damage, so when you do crit you do see a higher number. Or if you really want to be like mathematical optimized, you want to go for the 100% crit rate and then crit damage and attack, and then try to optimize these two, in which my calculator would have been useful, but I haven't plugged the numbers through because I don't really have time right now. But something like this is going to be the best, because Mist Splitter is a 5-star, and it does give you all of this crit damage. You don't need so many substats in crit damage, so you can focus more onto attack, so you should have about 2,500 attack. I'd say a minimum, if you're running this sword, is 2,100, and if you're above 2,300, it's very good. If you're using a Jade Cutter, then I'd advise not going Blizzard Strayer, because you're already at 50% crit rate. The Jade Cutter gives you 44%, and you have 5% naturally, so that puts you at 50%. And so if you use the 4-piece Blizzard Strayer effect, you already get to 105% crit rate. and so you're wasting 5%. I mean, you could run it and then not run her in a permafreeze team. Well, you'll be at a very high percent crit rate, but then like also why are you running 4-piece in that case? You don't really need that 4-piece effect. It might be better to go and get some other effect like 2-piece Glad. So if you're running Jade Cutter, I would look for something, basically another type of artifact set that might work very well with her, so that you can leverage that high crit rate that you're already going to have, and then get all of your other stats and get some other like charge attack bonus or some other effect from another set in order to maximize your damage. If you have a Summit Shaper, then I would say definitely run Blizzardstrayer. It's the best way to go. You will need a Shielder so that you're maximizing your damage from the Summit Shaper's effect, which is very, very good. The next set that I would recommend is actually running Retracing Bolide, and then probably with Zhongli, so that you're getting Resistance Shred and basically increasing your more damage even more, or a Diona Shield, which will basically give you more of that crit rate with the Cryo Resonance. And Diona's just literally such a good support because she gives you the shield, the healing, EM bonus at C6, which is not useful for Ayaka because she really doesn't react. Like, none of her reactions will scale off of her EM. She just is kind of like a beat stick on like a permafreeze team, and so you just want to go as much crit damage as you can. But basically, I would recommend Zhongli. Not everyone has him, but everyone should have Diona. Now, if you don't have the two above options, which most people shouldn't have, if you're like free to play and stuff, then I would recommend, this is what I'm doing, is get 1 copy of a Blackcliff Longsword. You don't need more. You don't ever need more than 1 copy of a Blackcliff weapon, basically. I don't think it's worth R5ing them. I think it's worth having multiple different ones. So say like a bow, a spear, and a sword, rather than like 3, like an R3 sword. Unless, like, of course you love Ayaka so much and you really want to get her an R5, like, free-to-play weapon, then yes, you could go for 5 of them. But I would recommend 1 copy will just do enough, because you're against bosses that you're not killing, you're not even going to get the passive effect, so the refinements don't matter. All you want is that crit, the high base attack that Blackcliff gives, and then the crit damage substat, which you're going to get at 0 refinements, basically. So I would say this is her best in slot 4-star, and I don't think I need to do math for this. You're going to find that everyone probably agrees that this is her best in slot 4-star, unless some new swords come out. In the second case, what you could try is Black Sword. So why I like Blackcliff more than Black Sword is because Blackcliff gives you the crit damage. There's like basically no 4-star swords except this one, the Blackcliff, that give you a crit damage bonus. Black Sword gives you crit rate, which is nice, but if we're doing the Blizzardstrayer, then we've already been through that we don't need a lot of crit rate. And so you're reaching like that dangerous line where you have too much crit rate with Black Sword. That means your base crit rate, you need to have 17.4%. And that means you can't have more than 12% crit rate substats. So you need to be very picky with your artifacts and just avoid all the ones with crit rate, which is not the worst, or you just don't use Blizzardstrayer, and that's also a viable option. But then you do want to somehow get your crit rate to something like 70 or higher percent, which is pretty hard to do, and you kind of need what I'd like to say are god roll or very, very good artifacts where you do have lots of crit rate rolls. But the Black Sword does really help with the high base crit rate that it gives you as a substat, and then the charged attack bonus is very, very nice on it. So Black Sword, if I had it, I would run it, and then I would avoid the crit rate substat, so I just probably switch around my flower and other artifacts and make sure there was not so many crit rate substat rolls on them, and everything would be crit damage, and the Black Sword would give me enough crit rate to utilize 4-piece Blizzardstrayer. But because it's you have to get it off the battle pass and it's not free to play, Blackcliff is the easy one you can guarantee yourself without spending any money. I don't recommend any other 4-stars other than ones with an attack main substat, and these will require you to have better artifacts that are going to be a little bit like the Summit Shaper, which has an attack main substat, but you're going to need to have a lot more crit stats. And so you're going to need really good artifact sets if you're going to go down this way. Again, the Blizzard Strayer does help, but you might not be able to, say, reach that 200% crit damage. You might end up somewhere with like 170 or 180. Like it depends on what you have if you're compensating for this, because with my build I have 220% crit damage, and if I took off the Black Cliff and I replaced that with attack percent, my crit damage would drop to something like 185 or something. So it's going to be a little bit worse in terms of that. But again, once you are around that 200% crit damage mark, or if you're at like 90% crit rate and 100% crit damage, that's pretty optimized. So getting an attack percent is not even that bad. You just want to make sure that you have a high base attack with whichever sword you pick. So the flute is a good notable one that I can think of off the top of my head as a 4-star. And then the new craftable 4-star weapon is going to be really good. The passive is, I think it has something to do with energy recharge or recharging ultimate. So it'll be nice, but I think Ayaka's ult, you might be a little bit hosed with it. Like you're not always going to be able to use it even if you recharge it too quickly, because it might be on cooldown or stuff like that. And so that's why I'd prefer something like a Black Cliff passive, which just increases your charged attack, which you can basically do whenever. You don't have to wait for it to come off of cooldown. You just need a little bit of stamina, and then you can do a charged attack. And once you have a really good build, it's going to do so much damage, you don't really need to worry about it. But the new craftable one is a great one you can go for. And then depending on how much you like the passive, you can refine it, although I'd recommend just getting it at R1. I don't think you need to do refinements for it. Yeah, these are just the things that have been bouncing around in my head, and I just wanted to put out a little video with Ayaka. I think she's going to be a super cool character, and if you're saving for someone else, that's totally okay also. There's going to be a lot of new Inazuma characters that are coming out, and it's going to be super cool to see. I hope you liked the video, and I hope to see you in the next one.